So you have this, you know, in a part of the world where you would expect a Westerner to be blocked and blocked and blocked, suddenly, in moments of great crisis, the door is open in a way it is never open in the West, where you're treated like dirt when you turn up at a hospital to talk to someone, whereas there you're treated like an honored guest. And of course, you honor the fact that they do that, and you report what they say, and do it, I think, very fairly.
What do you think they are learning from their own past experiences? Many Middle Eastern countries, in the past, everything closed, but now they found out to their advantage to open up little bit.
I think that you know, over the past 30, 40 years, many Arabs have been educated in the West. They've seen the power of the media, television, newspapers. Not very good television newspapers in my view, but they've seen it. And I think the opening up of Al Jazeera, the immediate reality of war in Al Jazeera, which is infinitely better covered and more bloodily covered than it is in the West. For Arabs, it's become a kind of participation. They want to see the war, and they know that if they want their suffering to be projected, they will have to talk to us. But they treat us, you know, I mean, obviously we take the risk if shells are falling around a hospital, you know. I remember at the very end of the American invasion, when the Americans were trying to cross the Tigris River, I got into the main teaching hospital in Baghdad. And I went in the emergency room, and it was inches high in blood. It was rivers of blood. It was coming over the top of my shoes. And there were men and women and children lying on stretchers, crying and screaming. There was a young soldier, and he was on fire. He'd been hit by some form of napalm. And he was crying, "Umma, umma, umma, mummy, mummy, mummy," you know. And there was a man lying on a stretcher, an old man, and he had an eye blown out of his head. His right eye was missing, and someone had pushed a handkerchief in. There was all this blood running down the handkerchief, and these children crying in the ward, and all the glass was coming in from the shell fire, American shell fire. And it was like a scene out of the Crimean War, you know, Florence Nightingale with her lamp. It was just, but there was no Florence Nightingale. There were the doctors, who of course were the heroes. And I came out of the hospital afterwards, and there were shells falling in the hospital grounds, American shells. I should add, there was also an Iraqi armored vehicle hiding beside the hospital.
Oh, I see.
And I saw the car down the end of the road, and I realized that I had to run to that car as fast as I could. And it was an old car I borrowed from an Iraqi, and I set off at very high speed. You know, the air pressure changing of the shells. You know, I knew that I could end up in that sea of blood if I didn't watch out. And I got to the car, and it was a classic scene from every movie. I couldn't get it to start. And in the end, these two Iraqis emerged from a coffee shop. Of all things, the shop was shut, but they emerged from the door. And they said, "Did I want to push?" And I said, "That would be very good." And they pushed me, and I went, and the car started. And my goodness, I drove fast out of there. But I got the story, you know, which was what I got the report out. And I was able, in this, you know, when all the newspapers were reporting the heroic Americans storming into the center of Baghdad, I had this vision of hell. This is what the war is actually like for Iraqis. Most of the patients were civilians, of course, not soldiers.
You know, there's a new phenomenon I was told from my reading about foreign correspondents, that some of them become a hotel correspondent.
Well, no, I invented the phrase hotel journalism.
Good, so at least, talk to us about this phenomenon.
Well, it's a complicated one because it's not as, like all things, it's not as simple as it sounds.
Yes, yes.
After the insurgency began in Iraq, very seriously, when journalists were shot by insurgents, had their throats cut, just like any other civilian or Western. Many Western news organizations decided that they couldn't insure their journalists unless the journalists were protected, put into compounds with armed guards, and couldn't travel outside without mercenaries. I can't remember what you call them here, armed contractors, mercenaries in other words, armed men, former soldiers. Yeah, in many cases just lawless thugs, but they were protecting the journalist. And what would happen effectively is that the journalist, under instructions from his office not to leave his hotel, and who, for perfectly good reasons, didn't want to risk his life because he had family, children, and so on, he would arrive at the airport, he'd be escorted to the hotel, he'd stay in the hotel, eat there, drink there, sleep there, and he would call, say, US headquarters on his mobile phone, and then he'd call Iraqis he knew on his mobile phone, and after 2 or 3 weeks he'd be escorted back to the airport and would leave. All he saw of Baghdad would be the airport, the road into the hotel room, and the road back to the airport. Now, on his copy it would say so-and-so Baghdad, his dateline, you see. He was there. Well, he was physically there, but he might as well have been in the west of Ireland or Texas. Yeah. He could have used the same mobile phone to ring the same people. And I called this hotel journalism because, in effect, it gave the impression to the reader or the viewer, as the journalist stood on the roof of his hotel with a palm tree behind him, he's in the Middle East, that this guy was moving around Iraq, that he had the freedom to move and he was making a tour d'horizon, giving his analysis of the situation, when in fact he could make the same analysis living in London or Washington. And my colleagues, Patrick Coburn, for example, on The Independent, myself, we still traveled outside with our own Iraqi friends, unarmed, on our own. It was very dangerous, but you could still do it. But whether it was worth it, well, we got away with it. Touch wood, we still do. But I mean, I remember once there'd been 2 bombs in a Shiite bus station, obviously set off by Sunni insurgents. I got through to the bus station. There was blood everywhere. A bus was on fire. There was a dead baby beside it. I got one picture of the dead baby. I started interviewing a woman who'd seen it, and I had 40 or 50 people banging on the roof of the car. They wanted to kill me. So we got in the car and drove away. Well, what did I get? 50 seconds. I saw it. I had enough to write a story of the carnage. I saw it. But I was watching. It was like smashing a plate glass window or a stained glass window, and you get one piece of glass. That's all you could see. But it was better than staying in a hotel. At least you saw the chaos, the fear. But there comes a point, of course, when you say, well, is it worth it? Is it worth that risk, day after day after day? I'm shortly going back to Afghanistan when I will go to Kandahar without escorts, without mercenaries, and not embedded. After that, I'm going back to Iraq again. And I do ask myself if these wars are worth it now, because I don't want armed men around me. I remember one occasion I went down to Fallujah on my own in my own car. And I went into the city. There'd been a lot of violence. The Americans had killed a lot of Iraqi policemen by mistake, as usual. And people were very angry. I interviewed people in Fallujah. And as I came out about 6 or 7 miles east of Fallujah, on my way back to Baghdad, there was a BBC crew, a woman reporter, surrounded by armed former British soldiers. Robert, what did you see? You see? And I thought, well, what do I do? This woman won't go into Fallujah because she's told by her security escort she can't go. So I, who do go into Fallujah and take the risks, I'm supposed to give information to the BBC, which won't go. So I gave her a few details, but obviously I kept what I had in my notebook for myself. But, well, she wasn't being a hotel reporter. She did go down the road. But it's a great difficulty to know what to do. You see, if you go back to the incident in Tripoli in northern Lebanon, which I've just described to you, when I got to the scene, and after I went up in the building with the soldiers, and when I came down again, there were lots of reporters there and camera crews, but they were all Lebanese, including Lebanese who were working for the BBC. But there were no Brits or Americans there. I was the only Westerner, the only person with blue eyes, the only white man, if you like, you see. And what had happened, it wasn't actually dangerous, well, it was dangerous, but no more than usual for Western correspondents. But what had happened is they'd fallen into the habit of reporting from head office. Send the locals out to do the filming. Send the Iraqis, send the Lebanese. Let them take the risks. And I looked, I mean, people in Tripoli were pretty angry. And of course, they always make a Western connection with any violence. Not totally wrongly. And I thought, what am I doing here? I'm the only white man in the street, you know. There was a time when there'd be lots of Western journalists, and it would be normal for the Lebanese to see them. And now they didn't. They stayed in Beirut. And what they would do is they would give a commentary from Beirut, saying they were in Beirut, and the pictures would show the carnage in the streets taken by Lebanese crews. And I thought the Baghdad thing had bred a new kind of journalism. So did Afghanistan, where the reporter doesn't take the risk, but the cannon fodder, the local reporters. They go out and take the risk for you. I don't do that because I want to see what's going on. Because, of course, when you get anything secondhand, it's not going to be the real thing. It'll be close, maybe, but it won't be the real thing. And, you know, I'm not the only reporter trying to do what I'm trying to do who's Western, but it gets more and more difficult. You know, journalism as a foreign correspondent in the Middle East, in the Muslim world, in a war zone, is getting more lethal.